Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone joining us from around the world. On behalf of Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies and our partners at Cordate, HIL, and the African Center of Excellence for Access to Justice, and with the unwavering support of IDLO and the World Justice Project, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the global launch of Justice Within Reach. To officially open today's launch, it is my pleasure to invite Ms. Helene Vandenberg, CEO of Cordate, to deliver our welcoming remarks. Cordate has been a longstanding leader in advancing community-based approaches to peace, justice, and inclusion, and has played a key role in shaping the vision behind Justice Within Reach. Helene, thank you once again for your partnership and leadership. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura, very much, and also for everyone for being here. So good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the launch of the Justice Within Reach campaign. As mentioned, my name is Helene Vandenberg. I'm CEO of Cordate, and it is a true pleasure to open this global event and to see such a strong and diverse group of people joining us today. It's an important day for all of us. So a special welcome to Excellencies and our distinguished guests, and to many others working to close the gap between people and the justice they need. This launch, to start with, is the result of a collective effort, and I would like to warmly thank the fellow members, first of all, of the Working Group on Customary and Informal Justice and SDG 16+, which has helped bring diverse pathways to justice to the center of the global justice agenda. I would also like to acknowledge the campaign co-conveners and all those who have contributed to bringing this campaign to this point. As already said, Cordate is very proud to be part of this effort, already for such a long time. Not because this is about one organization, but because the issue at the heart of this campaign speaks directly to the challenge that we all share: how to make justice accessible and meaningful for people whose everyday lives and problems often remain unseen, unresolved, or treated as too local to matter. And we know that for many, justice is still too far away. It may be too costly, too formal, or simply not available where they live. And when justice is out of reach, the consequences are tangible. Grievances remain unresolved, exclusion deepens, trust weakens, and unresolved justice can easily escalate to violent conflict and feed cycles of fragility. And this is why the idea behind Justice Within Reach is so important, because it starts from a simple but powerful insight. Most people do not seek justice through courts, lawyers, or formal institutions. They turn first to people and mechanisms close to them. It's the community-based justice actors. It's the customary leaders and other trusted figures in their communities. And these pathways are not secondary. Often, they are the first and sometimes the only accessible routes to justice. But recognizing this reality, and I think many reports have shown that reality, it does not mean romanticizing it. It has to be effective and truly responsive. Diverse pathways to justice cannot reinforce unequal power relations, exclusion, or discrimination. So the question is not how to recognize these pathways, but the question is how to engage with them constructively and support them to become more inclusive, accountable, and aligned with human rights standards. So this is also where Cordate's own experience connects to the campaign. In our work with partners, mainly in fragile settings, justice is not a technical or distant agenda, it is trust, social cohesion, and peace. So Cordate is proud to have been co-founder and early supporter of the working group. We joined with more than 20 partners to produce the landmark 2023 report, Diverse Pathways to People-Centered Justice, which might be known to many or maybe some of us in this launch of the conference. We also worked alongside our friends and allies to present last year's first global convening on customary and informal justice. Through our work on the ground, including our Dutch-funded program, Just Future, we gathered evidence and advocated for better engagement with customary and informal justice systems. So, to finalize, today's launch is an important step in carrying that momentum forward. The campaign gives us a shared agenda, stronger political recognition, increased financing, and stronger national and local ownership for everyday justice. This agenda cannot be delivered by one organization or actor alone. It requires governments, donors, civil society, formal and informal justice providers, researchers, communities, and development partners to work more closely together. So today, then, is also more than the launch of a campaign. It is an invitation to all of you to listen, to exchange, and to build that momentum together. So, on behalf of Cordate, I want to thank you very much for joining us here today. And we look forward to working with this coalition of commitment makers to bring justice truly within reach for all. So, thank you, Laura, for the time today.
Thank you, Helene, for your thoughtful remarks. And again, we thank Cordate for your leadership and partnership in bringing this important initiative to life. So today's webinar marks the public launch of the new global campaign dedicated to advancing diverse pathways to people-centered justice. And as Helene has highlighted, more than 5 billion people worldwide still lack meaningful access to justice. And yet for most people, justice is primarily found through customary community-based, indigenous, and non-formal justice actors and systems that are trusted, accessible, and rooted in communities. And Justice Within Reach was developed just with this thought. Through the Working Group on Customary and Informal Justice, as Helen mentioned, which was established in 2020, the working group has pursued a common agenda advocating for the centrality of CIJ systems as critical to advance access to justice for all. In 2024, we developed a joint action plan, which among several objectives, we set out to develop a comprehensive 3-year advocacy strategy focusing on coordinating policy advocacy through a multi-level campaign. Building on the findings of the 2023 Diverse Pathways to People-Centered Justice report and the momentum generated by the 2025 Warsaw Call to Action, through a 1-year consultation process with the support of our wonderful consultant, Stacey Cram, this campaign seeks to strengthen political commitment, mobilize investment, and elevate local leadership in support of diverse pathways to justice. Today, our objectives are threefold. First, we will introduce the Justice Within Reach campaign strategy and vision, including its key trajectories and opportunities for engagement. Second, to foster dialogue among policymakers, justice practitioners, civil society leaders, and grassroots actors, how we can collectively strengthen people-centered justice systems. And third, to generate momentum toward concrete commitments and coordinated action at the global, regional, national, and most importantly, local levels. We are truly honored to be joined today by an outstanding and diverse group of speakers representing governments, civil society, judicial leadership, community justice actors, and international organizations. In our first session, our plan, campaign strategy, and key trajectories, we will hear from my fellow campaign co-leads and members of the working group. Zainab Malik, Senior Policy and Advocacy Advisor at Hill. Davide Soto Naranjo, Security and Justice Expert at Cordate. And from Leonie Mutoni, Coordinator at the African Center of Excellence for Access to Justice. The three of them will walk us through the origins of the campaign, its strategic objectives, and how stakeholders can become commitment makers and active partners in this growing global movement. In our second dialogue session, Our Vision, Many Ways to a More Just World, we will hear reflections from distinguished leaders and practitioners working at the forefront of people-centered justice. First, the Honorable Nancy Catalco, Secretary and Chairperson of the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples of the Philippines. Second, from Ms. Pascal Bambara, Director of Access to Justice and Aid to Victims at the Ministry of Justice of Burkina Faso. And lastly, Dr. Wambua Kituku, Executive Director of Kituo cha Sheria in Kenya. We will also be honored to hear a keynote address, Director General of Human Rights and Multicultural Justice of the Supreme Court of Justice of Mexico. He will be speaking on behalf of Honorable Hugo Aguilar Ortiz, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who unfortunately could not join us here today, but we are very happy to have Dr. Martinez with us, representing the Supreme Court. And he will reflect on the integral role of customary justice systems play in delivering people-centered justice. And finally, we will conclude with closing reflections and a call to action from Udo Jutilo, CEO of Hill. And before we begin, I would really like to welcome everyone, all the participants joining us today. Your presence reflects the growing movement behind people-centered justice and the recognition that achieving justice for all requires embracing the many pathways through which communities already seek and experience justice every day. With that, to begin our first session, I am delighted to welcome my three campaign co-leads. And they will introduce the campaign strategy, discuss how Justice Within Reach aims to build political momentum, and strengthen local leadership around diverse pathways. I'll first turn to Zainab. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Laura, and a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our participants here today, and a happy Eid al-Adha to all of you celebrating this auspicious holiday. On behalf of the Working Group on Customary, Informal, and Community Justice and SDG 16 Plus, and my co-leads for the campaign, I'm very honored to be with all of you here today and present the strategy for the campaign. At its very core, the campaign is premised on one singular principle, which is the simple recognition that for most people around the world, justice does not begin in a courtroom. In fact, it is found in people, institutions, and practices that people turn to when they experience justice problems. And these problems come in many shapes and forms and pertain to disputes over land, family, violence, death, housing, or even access to public services. Now, what we see from our experience is that these pathways are diverse and deeply rooted in local realities. In Ethiopia, these look like village elders or the Shumagle that process over 3 million disputes per year. In Sierra Leone and Kenya, these pathways take the form of community paralegals that help people navigate legal problems and access remedies. In Colombia, we see the houses of justice bring justice services closer to communities. In Uganda, the Butaka courts continue to play an important role on the front lines of local dispute resolution. In many contexts, these pathways are truly diverse. Women's associations, faith leaders, customary authorities, and local mediators, all serving as the first point of contact when people experience justice problems that impact their everyday lives. What data from organizations such as the World Justice Project, World Bank, and Hill show us that people turn to people that they know and pathways that they trust. And for many people, these pathways cannot be described as alternative justice pathways. In fact, they are at the very core of their justice journeys. And the main objective of the Justice Within Reach campaign is to recognize that, but also to strengthen these pathways. The Working Group on Community and Informal Justice and SDG 16 Plus brings a wealth of experience from policymakers, governments, grassroots organizations from all across the world. And in these diverse contexts, what we see is a shared recognition that diverse pathways to justice are not peripheral to justice systems. They are central to how justice is experienced for billions of people worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, we already know that community-based, customary, and informal justice actors are already helping millions and millions of people resolve disputes, prevent conflicts, strengthen social cohesion, and access remedies in ways that are practical, affordable, and locally legitimate. In many contexts, they are also helping reduce pressure on overburdened formal justice systems and extend the reach of justice services to communities that would otherwise remain excluded. At the same time, we recognize that proximity and trust alone are not enough to provide people with people-centered outcomes. This campaign is built on the premise that every pathway to justice, whether formal, informal, local, customary, must uphold fairness, accountability, procedural safeguards, human rights, and most importantly, it must provide people with solutions to their problems. And the timing of this campaign could not be more urgent. As we all know, we are living in very difficult times. The global context is becoming increasingly fragile. Levels of conflict, displacement, social polarization continue to rise. For the fifth year in a row, the world is becoming less peaceful than ever before. Formal justice systems across countries are overwhelmed, underfunded, geographically inaccessible, and difficult for many people to navigate effectively. And as we all know, today, more than 5 billion people still lack effective, meaningful access to justice. Yet, one thing remains constant, and this is really the strength of the campaign. Communities continue to thrive. They continue to create solutions that are innovative, that support local realities, and create sustainable pathways to justice. And this is often with limited recognition, limited investment, and limited integration into national and regional justice systems. And the Justice Within Reach campaign aims to do just that. It aims to strengthen these stories of resilience, these pathways that had time and time again proven to be effective, and support scaling of these pathways. And with that, and to go into more detail of how exactly we plan on doing this, I hand it over to my colleague, Davide.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zainab. I would like to say a few words about how the campaign wants to drive change. And the campaign is structured around three main objectives. The first objective is about creating an enabling policy environment. But what does this mean in practice? It means that community-based and informal justice pathways should not be treated as something that sits outside the justice agenda. As a matter of fact, in many countries, these pathways are already part of how people seek justice, as my colleagues who preceded me already underscored. So the question is how policy frameworks at the global, regional, and national levels can engage with them by recognizing their role, but also looking carefully at safeguards, accountability, gender equality, human rights standards, and how they relate to formal justice systems. The second objective is increased investment. We know that justice financing is under pressure, and at the same time, the justice gap is widening. Customary and informal justice in particular is still underfunded and not always seen as part of the justice investment. Through evidence, the campaign wants to make the case more clearly that investing in diverse pathways can be practical, cost-effective, and directly relevant to people's everyday justice needs. The third objective is stronger national local ownership. This departs from the consideration that the campaign cannot only be a global conversation about justice. It has to support the leading role of national and local actors who understand how justice is experienced and delivered in their own context. Concretely, in 3 to 4 selected countries, the campaign will cooperate with national campaign actions and with the development and with the involvement of civil society actors, grassroots justice defenders, women-led organizations, customary and informal justice actors, alongside formal justice institutions and national policymakers. But the next question, and therefore the next slide, would be how do we organize this work? Well, the strategy sets out 3 trajectories supported by a commitment-making process. Firstly, the first trajectory is coordinated targeted communications. This is about building a clear common narrative. We will develop shared messages, strong evidence, and stories from practice that show why diverse justice pathways matter and what engagement looks like in real life. So this is not just about communication for visibility. It is about communication to build understanding, credibility, and confidence around this agenda. The second trajectory is global and regional key policy events. This is where the campaigns creates political traction. The campaign strategy mentions moments such as the UN Crime Congress, the SDG 16 conference, and the OECD roundtable. For later moments, it also refers to spaces such as the High-Level Political Forum, the 2027 SDG Summit, the UNFCCC COP32 in Addis Ababa, and the UN Forum on Human Rights, Democracy, and Rule of Law, among others. The point is not just to be present at these events. The point is to use these spaces to connect CIJ with wider policy conversations. The SDGs, gender equality, conflict prevention, and climate action, among others. A very important moment will be the second global convening on customary informal justice in Freetown, Sierra Leone, planned for later 2026. This is particularly exciting for two main reasons. Firstly, because the convening will take place on the African continent with the strong leadership of the government of Sierra Leone. And secondly, because it will have a very clear thematic angle, as it will explore the link between CIJ and conflict prevention and peace building. Which leads me to the third trajectory, which is in-country level cooperation. This is where the campaign becomes more grounded. In selected countries, working group members and national actors will support policy dialogue, coordination, learning, and stronger complementarity with national and subnational policy processes. This matters because global advocacy has credibility only if it stays connected to context on the ground. Country-level engagement helps us learn what works, what safeguards are needed, and how formal, customary, and community justice actors can work together in ways that are practical, fair, and locally owned. So the logic is quite simple. Communications build a narrative, global and regional events create the political traction, and country-level work and cooperation keep the campaign practical and locally owned. And across all three, the commitment-making process helps ensure that the campaign is not only about discussion, but also about concrete action. And with that, I would like to leave the floor to our fellow co-lead Leonie, who will say a few words about impact and engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Davide. Greetings, everyone. So like any worthy campaign, we have to be able to measure if we have actually achieved what we have set out to do for these next 3 years. And for us, we think that we should be able to see change on different levels, in conversations, in commitments, funding, partnerships, but of course, ultimately, in people's everyday experiences with justice. So first of all, we will see CIJ not treated as a side issue or alternative, as my colleague mentioned earlier, but rather as part of the mainstream justice conversations and policies. So for example, when global forums or SDG 16 spaces, donor roundtables, and justice policy discussions, when they're consistently speaking about diverse pathways as part of people-centered justice. Another way we'll be able to tell is that we shall see governments move beyond discussion and into concrete action. For example, we hope to see more countries beginning to formally recognize and support or even work more closely with community justice actors. And this could be through policy reforms, pilot initiatives that my colleague just mentioned, or stronger coordination between formal and informal justice systems, etc. Of course, we also hope to see more funding in CIJ mechanisms, because if governments and donors and other actors are truly committed to supporting and strengthening these mechanisms, then that commitment must be reflected in national budgets and in funding priorities, right? And so that's why one of the key components of our campaign is to present a strong business case for investing in these diverse pathways to justice. of course, we also hope to see stronger coalitions, stronger networks forming across different sectors. Because in our campaign, we highlight that these diverse pathways, and we all know that they don't contribute only to fair justice outcomes, but they also support improved gender equality, sustaining peace, or even climate action. And so success in this aspect would mean, for example, these different actors increasingly working together. But ultimately, the most important measure of success for us will be whether people are actually able to meet their daily justice needs through systems that are accessible, trusted, and close to their communities. Because at the end of the day, this campaign, at the heart of it, is really about improving how people actually experience justice in their daily lives. And on that note, we hope you will be able to join us on this journey, including spreading the word to get more actors involved. We have some campaign visuals in different color palettes that you can see that we hope you will be using to post about this campaign online or in your networks as you engage with them to help amplify its reach. As Davide said, we will also be sharing some key shared messages. I also want to highlight that the campaign has a landing page which contains additional information and other campaign resources. So please take a few seconds to scan this QR code and it will lead you directly to the campaign's landing page. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zainab, Davide, and Leonie for outlining the campaign's vision and strategy. As they have said, and Leonie, thank you for highlighting this, we encourage everyone here to please join the movement and reach out. We will now move on to our second part of the webinar, our dialogue in many ways to a more just world, where we will hear perspectives from leaders and practitioners working directly to advance people-centered justice in communities and institutions around the world. First, it is an honor to have with us today the Honorable Nancy Catamco, Secretary and Chairperson of the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples in the Philippines. Secretary Catamco is an Indigenous leader, public servant, and advocate for the rights and welfare of Indigenous cultural communities. She has dedicated her career to advancing Indigenous peoples' rights, strengthening ancestral domain governance, and promoting inclusive and culturally responsive development grounded on self-determination, social justice, and Indigenous government systems. Secretary Catamco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good evening from the Philippines. Of course, good day to our partners from the Justice Within Reach campaign, distinguished colleagues, members of civil society, Indigenous leaders, development practitioners, policymakers, and fellow advocates of people-centered justice. On behalf of the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples of the Philippines, I am honored to join this important global conversation on justice, inclusion, governance, and human dignity. I speak to you today not only as chairperson of the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, but also as someone who has served as a legislator and as a local chief executive. Those experiences taught me that justice, especially for ordinary people, is rarely experienced first in courtrooms or formal institutions. More often, it is experienced in communities, in barangays, in dialogues among elders, in negotiations between families, and in attempts to restore peace before conflict becomes irreversible. In many indigenous communities in the Philippines, justice is relational before it becomes procedural. It is rooted in memory, kinship, reciprocity, collective accountability, and respect for community harmony. For many indigenous peoples, the first institution of governance was never the modern state. It was the community itself. This is why the recognition of indigenous and community justice systems is both necessary and complex. The challenge before many countries, including Philippines, is not simply expanding access to justice. The more difficult task is addressing historical injustice. Indigenous peoples across the world continue to live with the long shadows of displacement, exclusion, historical marginalization, and the weakening of traditional governance institution caused by colonial and post-colonial state formation. In the Philippines, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997, or IPRA, was a landmark recognition that indigenous governance systems and customary laws possess legitimacy within the broader constitutional framework. It affirmed that indigenous peoples have the right to self-governance, cultural integrity, and the continued practice of their customary justice systems. But legal recognition alone is not enough. The implementation of indigenous rights cannot rely on symbolisms alone. It requires policy, harmonization, institutional humility, political will, and continuous dialogue between state institutions and indigenous governance systems. At the NCIP, we constantly navigate tensions between national systems and indigenous governance traditions. There are situations where state procedures move differently from customary consensus building processes. There are cases where fragmented regulatory frameworks create pressure and confusion for communities already burdened by overlapping laws, permits, development projects, and institutional mandates. The Philippine Supreme Court itself, in the Honduran ruling, recognized the importance of respecting indigenous customs and customary justice mechanism within the framework of national law. The decision affirmed that indigenous justice systems are not peripheral alternatives existing outside legality, but form part of the plural legal reality recognized under our Constitution and under the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. Yet, even with these legal recognitions, implementations remains difficult and deeply contested. Development pressures, resource conflicts, environmental concerns, overlapping jurisdictions, and uneven program implementation continue to test the ability of states to genuinely uphold indigenous self-governance and self-determination. At the NCAP, we see these realities every day. We work in spaces where ancestral domain governance intersects with environmental regulation, local governance, investment policy, energy development, biodiversity protection, climate action, and social protection programs. Too often, indigenous communities become the point where fragmented policies converge without coherence. This is why initiatives such as Justice Within Reach are important. They remind us that justice must not only be legally available, it must also be culturally meaningful, socially acceptable, historically conscious, affordable, and grounded in the lived realities of communities. For many indigenous communities, justice is not simply about winning a case or imposing punishment. Justice is about restoring relationships, preserving dignity, protecting community harmony, and ensuring that future generations continue to inherit both identity and belonging. And perhaps this is one of the most important lessons indigenous communities offer to the world today. Justice systems become stronger when they remain close to the people. As we move forward, our challenge is not to romanticize customary systems nor to impose rigid state-centric approaches. Our challenge is to build genuine bridges between legal traditions while ensuring that human rights, accountability, inclusion, and community dignity remain at the center. Many indigenous communities are not asking to be isolated from the state. They're asking to be respected within the state. The future of justice, especially in plural societies, will depend not only on how states govern communities, but also on how states learn to listen to them. Because ultimately, justice becomes meaningful only when people can access it, trust it, and see themselves reflected in it. On behalf of the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples and the Indigenous Peoples of the Philippines, we thank the Justice Within Reach campaign for creating this important platform for dialogue and solidarity. Maraming salamat po, and may we continue building justice systems that are truly within reach for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Katamko, for reminding us the importance of going beyond just legal recognition and highlighting the importance of continued dialogue and collaboration between state institutions and Indigenous representation in order to really promote more inclusive and culturally responsive justice systems for all. Thank you for that. Now I have the privilege to introduce Madame Pascal Bambara. Madame Bambara is Director of Access to Justice and Aid to Victims at the Ministry of Justice of Burkina Faso. Through her work, she has advanced efforts to strengthen people-centered justice delivery, particularly for vulnerable and marginalized populations at the community level. Her expertise include justice sector coordination, access to justice policy, and victim support, with a strong focus on building more coherent and inclusive justice systems. Madame Pascal will speak in French. Madame, the floor is yours.
Merci. Merci. Vous m'entendez bien? Merci de m'avoir invité à ce groupe de travail. Je suis en effet Madame Pascal, la directrice de l'accès à la justice et de l'aide aux victimes au Burkina Faso. La direction de l'accès à la justice a pour mission principale de faciliter l'accès à la justice aux populations les plus défavorisées, et notamment les populations qui se trouvent dans les zones reculées, dans les zones rurales. Et je voudrais commencer mon intervention par une chose qu'une personne, une femme, voilà, une femme d'une zone rurale où nous sommes rendus pour une campagne de sensibilisation sur l'importance de la saisine des juridictions nous a dit. Cette femme nous a dit qu'elle n'avait pas connaissance d'une structure qu'on appelait la justice. Elle ne savait pas qu'il existait dans l'état où elle vivait au Burkina Faso une structure qui s'appelle la justice. Ce qu'elle savait, c'est que lorsqu'elle a un problème de justice, elle se rend auprès des membres de sa famille ou auprès des chefs traditionnels ou coutumiers pour pouvoir régler ce problème. Et comme vous le constatez actuellement, depuis quelques années, le Burkina Faso prône le retour à nos valeurs culturelles et sociales. Et le 14 janvier de cette année, une loi a été votée, la loi numéro 003 portant Faso Kaoré, qui institue au sein de nos communautés, dans les villages et les secteurs, les instances traditionnelles de règlement des différends qui seront animées par les acteurs coutumiers et traditionnels qui ont l'habitude de dire la justice, qui ont l'habitude de régler les problèmes que les populations viennent leur poser, les problèmes de tous les jours. Et donc, cette consécration a été reconnue dans notre Constitution à son article 124, qui prévoit qu'à côté de la justice classique, il peut être fait recours à des modes traditionnels de règlement des différends. Et c'est ce qui a abouti à la prise de cette loi. Et notre direction a été chargée de de l'élaboration de cette loi. Et comme je le disais, les instances sont instituées au niveau des secteurs et des villes. Voilà, ce sont des instances qui donnent la possibilité à toute personne qui se reconnaît, voilà, dans la justice traditionnelle de recourir. Et il faut dire aussi que avant cette prise de loi, ça n'a pas été fait de façon hasardeuse. Il y a des études qui ont démontré, notamment la IGNSTI, qui a démontré que seulement 5% des personnes qui avaient des problèmes de justice recouraient à la justice classique ou justice moderne, si on veut dire. Les 95 autres pourcents recouraient à la justice familiale ou à la justice traditionnelle. Ça veut dire que une grande frange de la population ne reconnaît pas la justice classique. Certains la trouvent trop éloignée, avec un langage juridique qui est vraiment inaccessible. Et vraiment, il y a un mythe qui avait été construit autour de cette justice-là. Et c'est dans cette lancée-là que les autorités ont décidé de consacrer la justice traditionnelle qui sera animée par les chefs traditionnels et coutumiers. Et il faut dire que c'est une justice qu'on a voulu vraiment indépendante de la justice moderne pour éviter les contrariétés des décisions. Voilà, c'est une justice dont aussi la saisine est facultative. C'est les personnes qui désirent la saisir, qui partent vers elle pour la saisir. Et lorsqu'une personne n'est pas d'accord pour la saisir, les deux personnes qui sont obligées de recourir à la justice traditionnelle. Et la loi portant façon du parole dit que lorsque l'instance traditionnelle de règlement des différends est saisie, elle a le devoir de concilier d'abord les parties avant de chercher à trancher. Et même quand elle tranche, selon ce que révèlent les commentaires, les observations des personnes qui animent ces justices-là, même lorsqu'on les tranche, c'est dans la paix, c'est dans la recherche de la cohésion, parce que elles n'ont pas de prison, elles ne prononcent pas d'amende, mais elles peuvent prononcer des réparations pour rétablir la situation qui avait été déséquilibrée avec par l'avènement du conflit. Donc, c'est une justice vraiment indépendante de la justice classique, à quelques exceptions près, mais c'est une justice qui vient compléter cette justice traditionnelle-là. Elle ne vient pas s'opposer. Les acteurs ne sont pas des opposants, les acteurs travaillent en bonne intelligence. Il peut arriver que les acteurs traditionnels qui rendent la justice renvoient des affaires devant les autorités judiciaires classiques. Et la loi prévoit aussi que lorsque une affaire est de nature à porter atteinte à la paix vraiment sociale et que les acteurs de la justice moderne qui sont saisis se rendent compte de cela, ces acteurs-là peuvent renvoyer la décision et l'affaire devant la justice traditionnelle qui est peut-être plus à même de maintenir la cohésion sociale par les décisions, par la conciliation et tout ça. Voilà, donc c'est ce que je voudrais dire à ce qui concerne cette loi-là. C'est pour dire que le Burkina Faso n'est plus dans les phases d'études ou bien des paroles, mais le Burkina Faso est engagé. Le Burkina Faso est en avant. Voilà, et actuellement, nous sommes dans une phase de formation des acteurs traditionnels qui doivent siéger au niveau de ces instances-là. Et nous les formons sur la loi. Et eux, ils nous disent ce qu'ils font, les us et coutumes qu'ils utilisaient, et nous les formons sur la loi pour pouvoir accorder nos violons, pour ne pas qu'il y ait d'étincelles lors de la mise en œuvre de cette loi. Et ce qu'il faut que j'ajoute également, c'est que cette loi ne vient pas pour changer fondamentalement ce que font les acteurs traditionnels. Elle vient juste pour accompagner, pour reconnaître ce que ces acteurs font, pour lui donner une forme et une force. Voilà pourquoi la loi prévoit que les acteurs traditionnels désormais, lorsqu'ils vont recevoir des parties, vont dresser des procès-verbaux qui devront avoir force de chose jugée lorsque ces procès-là ont été signés des parties, des membres de l'instance et des parties. Et ces décisions-là pourront être exécutées comme une décision de justice désormais. Voilà, l'autorité publique, la force publique doit l'accompagner pour l'exécuter comme les décisions qui sont rendues par les instances classiques. Parce qu'il faut dire que même si une grande partie des populations recouraient à la justice traditionnelle, il faut dire que les décisions n'étaient constatées par rien. Voilà, il y avait une conciliation ou bien il y avait une décision qui avait été rendue Et l'exécution de la décision dépendait du bon vouloir des parties. Lorsqu'une partie trouvait que la décision ne l'arrangeait pas, elle ne l'exécutait pas. Et en ce moment, les parties étaient obligées, si elles le souhaitaient, de recourir à la justice moderne. Et si elles trouvaient que la justice moderne était trop loin ou que ne convenait pas vraiment à leurs conditions, étaient obligées de rester là comme ça avec une décision qui n'est pas exécutée. Donc, ça veut dire qu'en ce moment, on recourait à la justice traditionnelle, mais le besoin de justice n'était vraiment pas satisfait. Mais cette loi vient donner une force, une forme et une force aux décisions que ces acteurs traditionnels vont prendre sur le terrain et l'État va accompagner l'application et l'exécution de cette décision-là. Et en ce qui concerne, si je peux parler des défis, et vous savez, le contexte financier mondial, je pense que c'est le même un peu partout. Au Burkina Faso aussi, nous sommes confrontés à un défi sécuritaire qui fait que la plupart de nos ressources sont dirigées un peu vers la sauvegarde de l'intégrité de notre territoire. Mais la sauvegarde de l'intégrité de notre territoire n'est pas incompatible aussi avec la recherche de la justice. Parce qu'il faut dire que tout conflit trouve sa base dans une situation d'injustice quand on cherche bien. Voilà. Mais le défi financier est là. Mais les instances traditionnelles ne viennent pas exacerber ce défi financier-là. Parce qu'il n'y aura pas de construction de nouveaux palais de justice. C'est vrai qu'il y aura des frais de fonctionnement parce qu'on va mettre à la disposition de ces instances-là des registres, des procès verbaux, mais il n'y aura pas de construction de palais de justice. Les chefs traditionnels et coutumiers vont continuer à rendre justice là où ils le faisaient au sein de leur palais et l'État va se charger de les accompagner en leur fournissant des registres et tout ce qui va avec pour pouvoir faire le travail de façon convenable. Voilà ce que je pourrais dire en gros sur les innovations au Burkina Faso. Nous sommes vraiment en marche, nous sommes en pleine phase d'implémentation. Actuellement, nous avons fait des visites dans un certain nombre de zones pilotes pour saluer les chefs traditionnels avec le ministre, présenter, leur dire que nous venons les informer de ce que la loi a été prise pour accompagner ce qu'ils font déjà sur le terrain. Et nous avons commencé déjà une session également de formation de ces acteurs traditionnels. De formation, c'est un peu trop dit, c'est un cadre d'échange. Parce que à ce cadre d'échange, la première a eu lieu du 20 au 22 à Ouagadougou, dans le royaume du Congo. Et c'est un cadre d'échange où il nous présente les mécanismes qui existent dans le royaume où on se trouve. Voilà. Et nous, on leur présente ce que la loi dit et quelques innovations qu'il y a. Et ce que je veux ajouter, c'est que la plupart des acteurs traditionnels que nous avons approchés, les rois, ont salué l'avènement de cette loi. Parce qu'il faut reconnaître que ce sont ces instances qui existaient avant qu'il n'y ait qu'il n'y ait le contact avec la puissance colonisatrice. C'était les chefs de famille, les chefs traditionnels coutumiers qui tentaient de rendre la justice. Mais on a eu une justice classique qu'on a institutionnalisée, les institutions sont là, mais certains acteurs restent là, attachés toujours aux traditions et beaucoup y recourent. Il ne s'agit pas de personnes qui ne savent pas lire ou écrire, mais il s'agit également de personnes intellectuelles, mais qui sont attachées à nos valeurs culturelles et sociales, qui y vont également parce qu'elles veulent que à l'issue d'un règlement, que la paix qui régnait avant soit toujours là, que la cohésion soit là, la cohésion sociale et que l'entente familiale reste toujours. Donc, c'est pour dire que c'est une justice que nous saluons, que les acteurs traditionnels eux-mêmes saluent. Ils sont bien heureux que vraiment on puisse, les autorités actuelles puissent mettre en scène la justice traditionnelle et coutumière. Voilà ce que je pourrais dire en ce qui concerne l'expérience du Burkina Faso. Je vous remercie.
Madame Pascal, merci beaucoup. Thank you for your highlights. It was really interesting, how highlighting how this happens all around the world and not just Burkina Faso, and people still find formal justice systems too remote with the legal language that is really inaccessible, and how customary justice can really complement the formal justice systems to really guarantee access to justice for all. And it is great to hear all the innovative efforts carried out by the Ministry of Justice to bring this forth. Thank you. Last but not least, it is a great pleasure that joining us today is Dr. Wambua Kituku, Executive Director of Kituo cha Sheria, one of Kenya's leading legal empowerment and access to justice organizations. He has extensive experience advancing community-based legal aid, paralegal programs, and people-centered justice initiatives across Kenya and the region. His work focuses on strengthening legal empowerment, promoting access to justice for marginalized communities, and supporting locally led approaches to justice and human rights protection. Dr. Kituku, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I hope you can hear my audio. Thank you very much.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so yeah, I'm the Executive Director of Kituo cha Sheria, which is a legal aid and empowerment organization that was established in 1973 by public-spirited lawyers who saw the justice gap that existed at that time, that was also related to Kenya's colonial history. And therefore, for them, extending legal services to the poor, therefore, became one way of addressing the justice gap. And so Kituo works not just with lawyers, but also with paralegals and other frontline justice actors in a bid to ensure that the poor and the marginalized and the vulnerable in society are able to access justice, both from the formal as well as in the formal institutions of justice. So today I will share our experience in promoting alternative justice systems in Kenya, what is also being referred here as customary and informal justice systems. I will also share the lessons that we've learned, as well as the issues of reform that could also inform how we advocate for people-centered justice regionally and globally. So first, you may know that Kenya adopted a policy which gave formal recognition to alternative justice systems in our country. And the policy was adopted in the year 2020. Kituo was part of the task force that went around the country collecting views from Kenyans. And eventually, the policy was drafted, subjected to public participation, and eventually adopted by the judiciary. So the policy sets out three mechanisms of alternative justice that are now recognized. One is the autonomous mechanisms, which basically entail the traditional justice mechanisms. Second is court annexed mechanisms, and this is where issues are referred by courts to panels of mediators who then apply customary law or norms to resolve disputes. Then the third is third-party mechanisms, and this could be state-sanctioned mechanisms, administrative officers at the local level. It could also be civil society mechanisms like Kituo, legal aid providers, and faith-based organizations. Or it could be individuals who've been practicing are now recognized as mediators. So So Kituo's experience in the development of the policy, one lesson we learned is that indeed policy matters for purposes of recognition of alternative justice systems. And therefore, it could be a good practice to encourage other countries to follow our example, because with policy, the parameters of engagement between formal and informal justice systems becomes pretty clear, and it also allows for cross-referencing of disputes, both from formal to informal and from informal to formal. However, notwithstanding the fact that we have policy, still some old attitudes still remain. We see resistance to recognition of alternative justice mechanisms by some state actors. And my sense of it is that there is a residual colonial mentality, yeah, that continues to subjugate or suppress informal justice systems. And the misapplication of the repugnancy doctrine, which is provided for in law, also contributes to that kind of attitude. And I'll give you an example. Within the criminal trial process, prosecutors are allowed, as a way of diverting cases from courts, they're allowed to explore the use of alternative justice mechanisms as a way of ensuring the complainant as well as the accused person sit down, resolve the underlying dispute that led to the criminal action, and out of that, restorative form of justice is realized. The accused person is able to compensate the complainant, and then that is recorded in court as a withdrawal, a formal withdrawal of the criminal complaint. But then we see prosecutors persistently disregarding the use of alternative justice systems. And I guess for them, the fear is that if alternative justice mechanisms are fully recognized, then they see it as undermining their prosecutorial authority, which I think is wrong. So this calls for continuous capacity building, particularly for the formal justice actors, to ensure that they fully appreciate the importance of alternative justice mechanisms. Now, so our second role in this process sorry for that. Our second role as Kituo is in supporting the judiciary in implementation of the policy. And this entails largely cascading the policy to the some national levels to what we call in Kenya counties. So Kituo has worked with the judiciary to help courts in 15 counties to develop county action plans, which then give allocate roles and therefore form the basis of resource mobilization for the cascading of the policy to the lowest level possible. So our experience with that is that, again, you need collaborative efforts between formal and informal actors to ensure that the cascading down works successfully and garner support from all actors in society. The third thing Kituo has been doing is building capacities among paralegals and the justice actors in ensuring that the alternative justice is run in accordance with constitutional principles, particularly the Bill of Rights. Our experience is that sometimes customary norms can be implemented in violation of constitutional rights, particularly rights of women and vulnerable people like children. And therefore, we have been running training programs for alternative justice actors, the traditional justice mechanisms, as well as for paralegals who sit in arbitration panels. So our experience in that is that training is important and it needs to be prioritized as an important ingredient for the successful implementation of alternative justice. But then we also see some challenges, particularly with non-recognition of some of the alternative justice practitioners, particularly paralegals. In Kenya, even though we have a law that lays broad basis for recognition of paralegals, we still don't have a regulatory framework that therefore guides the state in how to go about with accreditation of paralegals. We also don't have state mechanisms for supporting the work of paralegals. And for that reason, I think it's important in other jurisdictions that a lot of attention be paid to recognition of frontline justice actors, particularly the paralegals. And I think for me, that's the experience that I would like to share from Kenya and from Kituo. I look forward to more engagement later in this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kituku. It's always wonderful to hear all the advances of the alternative justice systems in Kenya. It really is a guiding policy for many of us to learn from around the world. And of course, not without its challenges, having such advances in collaboration amongst the diverse pathways to justice, formal and customary and informal justice systems. Like, for example, the restorative justice example you provided, it is a great beacon of light for all of us. And thank you for highlighting how important building capacity is for the HAS to be run under constitutional principles. I want to thank you all the panelists, for these very rich and insightful reflections. I will now be switching to Spanish to introduce our keynote speaker. Es un verdadero honor presentar a nuestro conferencista principal. El doctor Víctor Leonel Juan Martínez es director general de Derechos Humanos y Justicia Pluricultural de la Suprema Corte de Justicia de México. A lo largo de su trayectoria, ha trabajado en la promoción y fortalecimiento de los derechos humanos, así como en el reconocimiento y articulación de los sistemas de justicia indígenas y pluriculturales dentro del sistema de justicia mexicano. Su labor se ha centrado en impulsar enfoques de justicia más inclusivos, interculturales y centrados en las personas, promoviendo el acceso a la justicia para comunidades históricamente excluidas. Le agradecemos profundamente su participación del día de hoy y esperamos con interés escuchar sus reflexiones sobre el papel de las diversas vías hacia una justicia en el fortalecimiento del acceso a la justicia para todas las personas. Doctor Martínez, tiene usted la palabra.
Sí, muchas gracias. Buenos días desde México, estimadas y estimados representantes de las diversas autoridades y organizaciones del mundo presentes en este relevante foro internacional de lanzamiento de la campaña Justicia al Alcance. Reciban un afectuoso saludo de la Suprema Corte de Justicia de México, particularmente del ministro presidente Hugo Aguilar Ortiz, quien por un imprevisto no pudo estar presente, pero me encomendó agradecer la invitación a participar en este encuentro y reconocer y saludar este esfuerzo y compromiso colectivo para efectuar esta campaña. Por supuesto, agradecemos también el interés por conocer de cerca la experiencia de transformación que se está dando actualmente en el Poder Judicial y en la justicia mexicana. Quiero comentarles que el 1 de septiembre de 2025 tomó protesta e inició funciones la nueva Corte Mexicana, integrada por primera vez de manera paritaria o casi, pues son 5 mujeres ministras y 4 varones ministros. Ese día tuvieron 2 actos de un profundo simbolismo, particularmente para el tema que nos ocupa para esta campaña. Al mediodía del 1 de septiembre del año pasado, recibieron el bastón de mando de representantes de pueblos y comunidades indígenas. Este bastón representa el mandato de mandar obedeciendo. Es un símbolo del compromiso que se adquiere con la comunidad y de servicio al pueblo. Más tarde, realizaron la apertura de las puertas del edificio que alberga a la Suprema Corte. De manera material, pues estaban cerradas esas puertas desde la pandemia de 2020-2021. De manera simbólica, pues habían permanecido así cerradas durante décadas para los sectores más vulnerables, los más desprotegidos y los excluidos históricamente. Por eso la decisión fue que esta nueva Suprema Corte de Justicia mexicana tendría una política de puertas abiertas a todos. Esto partía de 2 situaciones esenciales. Una, el diagnóstico de un poder judicial elitista, alejado de las bases de la sociedad, excluyente de pueblos y comunidades indígenas y contrario a los intereses de los sectores de atención prioritaria. Ello había conducido a una profunda reforma al sistema de justicia en México que, además de reorganizarlo, estableció que las personas juzgadoras, incluyendo a ministros y ministras, serían electas por el voto de la ciudadanía. Esta nueva corte, por tanto, tiene la legitimidad de haber sido electa por los pueblos de México. De ese ejercicio democrático resultó también que fuera elegido como presidente de la Suprema Corte de mi país Hugo Aguilar Ortiz, un indígena mixteco, hablante de su lengua y con una amplia y reconocida trayectoria en la lucha por el reconocimiento y en la defensa de los derechos de pueblos y comunidades indígenas. Esta profunda reforma del Poder Judicial en México fue la que posibilitó que desde 1857, año en que Benito Juárez, una figura de gran raigambre histórica en nuestro país y en América Latina, ocupara la máxima magistratura, es hasta ahora que otra persona de origen indígena encabeza este poder del Estado, instancia que estuvo reservada históricamente para las élites del país, situación que creo tampoco es ajena a las experiencias de sus países. Ahora bien, este triunfo simbólico e histórico debía acompañarse de acciones sustantivas para comenzar a transformar las bases de la justicia. Una justicia que en México ha sido extremadamente formalista y desconectada de las realidades sociales y al mismo tiempo una justicia racista y discriminatoria que excluyó a la pluriculturalidad. Para la mayoría del pueblo mexicano era casi imposible acceder al máximo tribunal. Las personas juzgadoras se convirtieron en personas inalcanzables que resolvían los asuntos encerrados en sus oficinas, apelando, en el mejor de los casos, solo a sus conocimientos jurídicos, siendo irrelevante la opinión de las grandes mayorías de la sociedad. Esta situación redundó en una justicia excesivamente formalista que en muchos casos no correspondía con la realidad y las aspiraciones del pueblo. Acudir a las instancias de procuración e impartición de justicia implicaba para la ciudadanía un nuevo problema de revictimización más que encontrar una solución real a sus demandas. Así lo confirman diversos estudios que situaban a la función judicial en México con apenas un 56% en la percepción de confianza y similar promedio en cuanto a su desempeño, siendo de los más bajos entre todas las autoridades de seguridad e impartición de justicia en el país. A ello se suma los altos costos que implica para las mayorías de las familias de bajos ingresos tener que contratar servicios jurídicos, además de la falta de una accesibilidad física a los tribunales y el fenómeno de la corrupción que rodeaba el sistema de justicia en México. Este diagnóstico se esboza y fue motivo para establecer y construir un plan estratégico de la nueva Suprema Corte, en la cual el ministro presidente ha establecido 9 ejes prioritarios, los cuales, por cierto, conversen ampliamente con los objetivos de esta campaña global. Estos son una justicia cercana al pueblo, una justicia plural e intercultural, una justicia con inclusión social, una justicia con perspectiva de género, una justicia de derechos colectivos, una justicia humanista, una justicia digital, una justicia ambiental y una justicia eficiente y responsable. En este sentido, la nueva Corte está construyendo una justicia de puertas abiertas con áreas de atención social y ciudadana que reciben y ofrecen el servicio de orientación jurídica a la población, que las vinculan con otras áreas que les pueden dar ese acompañamiento, como el Instituto Federal de la Defensoría Pública, organismo que además de tener representación en las 32 entidades del país, está estableciendo oficinas en regiones indígenas para acercar aún más sus servicios a esta población. Esta apertura al diálogo permanece también y se demuestra en la primera audiencia pública que realizó la Suprema Corte de Justicia sobre derechos de las personas con discapacidad en el mes de octubre del año pasado, en la cual durante 3 días se escuchó a personas y colectivos plantear sus necesidades y demandas sobre este tema. Por otra parte, mencionaba que el sistema de justicia indígena excluyó la pluriculturalidad. Fue hasta 1992 que la Constitución mexicana vino a reconocer que México era una nación pluricultural. Imaginen un país que tenía un legado cultural ancestral proveniente de las grandes civilizaciones mesoamericanas y que reconoce a 70 pueblos originarios y al hermano pueblo afromexicano y más de 16,000 comunidades guardianas de buena parte de la diversidad presente a lo largo y ancho de nuestro territorio. A pesar de esta diversidad innegable, incluso ya con el reconocimiento constitucional, los sistemas de gobierno y los sistemas de justicia propios que le daban sustento y preservaban esta pluralidad han sido infravalorados, discriminados, criminalizados y se asociaban como pueblos salvajes y atrasados. A estas prácticas racistas se sumó una actitud tutelar, paternalista, de vigilancia y control por parte del Estado sobre los sistemas de justicia comunitaria, y eran las instancias estatales las que debían validar la buena o mala práctica de las autoridades comunitarias al impartir justicia. Es decir, se trataba de una relación de exclusión y subordinación de la justicia indígena. A pesar de ello, algunas buenas experiencias desafiaron esta visión tutelar. Uno de los casos más conocidos es el de Oaxaca, estado del que proviene el ministro y del que también provengo, donde la mayoría de sus municipios, 418, más de alrededor de cuartas partes del total, se rigen por sistemas normativos comunitarios y también se crearon en esa entidad instituciones como la Sala de Justicia Indígena en el Poder Judicial local, reconocida por sus esfuerzos por generar mecanismos de coordinación con la justicia comunitaria. Por otra parte, en 2024 tuvo lugar en nuestro país una importante reforma constitucional sobre derechos de los pueblos indígenas y afromexicanos que, entre otras cosas, les reconoció el carácter de sujetos de derecho público, que implica que las distintas instancias del Estado mexicano deben dar un trato en condiciones de igualdad a las autoridades comunitarias y respetar sus actos jurídicos bajo sus sistemas normativos. En este mismo sentido, la reforma reforzó el derecho de pueblos y comunidades a la libre determinación, la autonomía y la jurisdicción indígena. Junto con esta reforma se suma precisamente las acciones que se han impulsado desde la Suprema Corte. En materia de justicia pluricultural, se ha podido realizar un de su derecho a la una iniciativa de corte itinerante que seguirá desarrollándose. Asimismo, estamos realizando, y eso le toca particularmente a la dirección de la cual soy titular, un programa que se llama Diálogos entre Justicias, el cual reunimos en regiones indígenas a autoridades comunitarias que imparten justicia con jueces y magistrados de la justicia ordinaria, no para que los jueces del Estado les vayan a dar lecciones o a capacitar, sino por el contrario, para que escuchen y conozcan las experiencias de partición de justicia que se implementan en las comunidades. Se trata de un ejercicio de igual a igual y de escucha y respeto hacia la jurisdicción indígena. A la par, se está haciendo una cuidadosa sistematización de estos diálogos para incorporarlas a un nuevo protocolo de coordinación entre justicias y además actualizar un protocolo para juzgar con perspectiva intercultural. A la fecha hemos realizado 6 diálogos en distintos estados de la República y vamos a continuar realizando otros más. De la misma manera, impulsamos los diálogos de saberes sobre derechos territoriales, el patrimonio cultural y la justicia ambiental, por el cual se busca recuperar y revalorar los sistemas de conocimientos, saberes y prácticas comunitarias en las actividades judiciales a través de una guía y otros instrumentos teórico-metodológicos que buscan fortalecer estas perspectivas en el actuar de las personas juzgadoras. Lo mismo en materia de los derechos económicos, sociales, culturales y ambientales. Estamos construyendo protocolos lo cual realizamos escuchas en distintas regiones del país porque consideramos importante escuchar y conocer la pluralidad del país jurídica y social para obtener mejores resultados. Vinculado a lo anterior, la nueva Corte desarrolla un sistema de investigación comunitaria para ampliar la visión tradicional del derecho en la práctica jurisdiccional y se trabaja también en un mecanismo para el reconocimiento de resoluciones y normas de pueblos y comunidades indígenas y afromexicanas para permitir una mejor divulgación sobre las resoluciones que imparten las autoridades comunitarias en diversas lenguas. Debo destacar también que el canal de la Suprema Corte se transformó ahora a Plural TV, siendo una de nuestras principales herramientas para amplificar las voces de la diversidad cultural. A estas acciones se suman diversos eventos, cursos, diplomados, seminarios sobre pluralismo jurídico, derechos sociales, derechos humanos, derechos ambientales, entre otros, que buscan fortalecer la nueva visión de una justicia pluricultural a través de acciones de formación continua de los operadores de justicia. Estamos, como podrán ver ustedes, trabajando desde distintos frentes arduamente en acciones que permitan alcanzar el objetivo 16, paz, justicia e instituciones sólidas de la Agenda 2030 para el desarrollo sustentable. Esta intensa labor realizada por la nueva Suprema Corte ha sido reconocida ya a nivel internacional por diversos organismos internacionales como las Naciones Unidas, pero sobre todo ha sido reconocida por las comunidades y las personas de a pie, como decimos en México, de diversos sectores que celebran nuestro trabajo en las visitas frecuentes que hacemos a los territorios, en los distintos eventos que organizamos o simplemente cuando acuden a la Corte en busca de alguna orientación y escuchan y saben que se les escucha y se les orienta. Una corte que saben ya no está cerrada en su edificio sede y que en medio de los grandes desafíos y retos que enfrentamos, trabaja incansablemente para cerrar la brecha de exclusión hacia nuestros pueblos y hacia las grandes mayorías a las que se les denegó por años la justicia en México. Reitero el agradecimiento de la Corte Mexicana por esta oportunidad de compartir nuestra experiencia en la transformación de la justicia y celebro el lanzamiento de esta importante campaña para revalorizar la justicia comunitaria y lograr, como bien expresa su eslogan, una justicia al alcance de todas las personas y comunidades. Desde nuestro espacio institucional, como lo he referido ya, estamos trabajando en esa ruta y tenemos el compromiso de seguirlo haciendo. Por eso quiero enfatizar que su campaña, en su lucha, en el compromiso de esta coalición global, el grupo de trabajo de justicia consuetudinaria y el objetivo 16 de la Agenda 2030, integrada por 27 organizaciones e instituciones líderes en materia de justicia, y que han venido impulsando esta importante campaña, estén seguros que tienen un aliado en la nueva Suprema Corte de Justicia de México. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, doctor Martínez, y saludos y gracias para el ministro Aguilar. Aplaudimos esta nueva política y la decisión de la nueva Corte Suprema de Justicia mexicana que tiene esta nueva política de puertas abiertas para todos Y el hito de que haya sido elegido como presidente de la Suprema Corte de México, el ministro Aguilar, que un indígena mixteco, a la experiencia de diálogos de justicia, todo lo que resaltas es una experiencia fascinante y de compartir y que otros países aprendan de ella. Cambiaré ahora a inglés. Thank you very much for those inspiring reflections and for reminding us that building people-centered does require recognizing and strengthening many ways communities already seek justice and resolve disputes, and how the appointment of Justice Aguilar, who's an Indigenous leader, as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has been a game changer towards the new, more inclusive strategic focus of the Supreme Court with a pluricultural and people-centered and, as you called it, open door justice emphasis. And the experience of justice dialogues is a wonderful experience to be shared for other countries to learn from. Thank you for that. And as we conclude today's launch, we turn now to the closing reflections and call to action from someone who has long championed people-centered justice and justice innovation globally. It is my great pleasure to invite Udo Judilo, CEO of Hill, to share his concluding remarks and reflections on the opportunities ahead for the Justice Within Reach campaign. Udo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura, and thanks to everyone. This is a bit of a difficult job because I think everything I would want to say, has already been said. I mean, these are really very powerful reflections and experiences that's been shared here in this conversation. But first, let me thank all of you who are working really hard on this Justice Within Reach campaign. I think it is really timely. I can't think of a better time to engage in a campaign of this nature. And the conversations we've had today is not only reassuring that we're on the right path, but also gives us the clear evidence that a lot of work is already happening and we are not starting from ground zero. There are things we can build on as we move forward. A number of reflections from my own parts. We make this point in Hill that justice is local. And listening to all the contributions in this conversation, it's pretty clear that justice is local. Because in every jurisdiction, in every country where we've had presentations, we have seen something unique about the way they're opening the justice space, about the various pathways that people are already exploring to resolve their justice needs, and the effort that they're making to have a marriage or a handshake of the informal and the formal to ensure that these pathways are recognized by law and what comes out of those processes are actually respected and implemented. And I think that is the beauty of people-centered justice, its acknowledgement of plurality of society, of the diversity of society, and of the uniqueness of each individual need that people have when it comes to their legal challenges or their justice needs. And just keeping that at the back of our mind, the local nature of justice and the uniqueness of individual justice challenges is really, really important because it then reinforces the point that's been made by all the presentations here about listening, being able to understand exactly what matters to people because their justice journey is unique. Their needs are unique. And in a plural society, it makes sense to understand what people are going through, but also to bring justice to where they are. Because we make the firm point that justice is an essential public service. And to that extent, it has to meet people where they are. And that is what all this multiplicity of pathways allows us to do, meeting people where they are to resolve their justice needs. The second point I want to make is that this conversation, this campaign helps us to showcase what is working. Some of the creative approaches that are being explored in various jurisdictions, some of the unique pathways that people are exploring the effort that is being made both from the formal sector and the informal sector, either to back up the traditional system or the informal system with legislation, to provide standardization processes, to ensure that the informal systems respect basic principles of human rights. All of these efforts and all of these examples are uniquely important because it helps us to sell the message about justice within reach, which is simply recognizing all these pathways, but making sure that these pathways in themselves actually enhance the human rights of those who use it, and that they are not in any way stumbling block or exclusionary to some individuals in the society. The third point I want to make is about the expediency of what we're doing. When we talk about the justice gap of more than 5.4 million people, when we look at the data that shows us that 70 to 80% of people across the world look for their justice solutions in the informal system, then it makes this very urgent. Again, meeting people where their points of needs are, or taking justice to where people are. And there's an irony of this number. One is that much of the justice budgets by countries go to the formal justice. And we are hearing in places like Burkina Faso, for instance, only about 10% of the population actually go to the formal justice system. And so, high percentage, maybe 80 to 90% of the resources go to the formal justice system, which is used by less than 30% of the population. That's a huge irony, and that's a big mismatch. And so, it is expedient, therefore, that we help countries have a proper match of need and resources. If most of the challenges are being resolved in the informal justice sector, it then begs the question why the money is not going to the informal justice sector. And so being able to push for that proper alignment of resources to meet people where their justice needs are is uniquely important. And having said that, there are three things, kind of a call for action in my view, that I want to put on the table as we wrap up. One is that we have to continue to share this message about how this is expedient, about how this actually responds to the actual needs of people, about how listening to people ensures trust in government and government institutions, and how this also enables a society to thrive because people can actually resolve their justice needs in a way that is important to them and that is credible to them. And so that message of expediency and urgency has to be out there. The second element, of course, is the idea of sharing experiences, which is part of what we're doing here today. And we need to do that more. And for those of you on this call, I think it is important that if there are good things you're doing in your locality, it should be helpful to share them with this campaign. And also to listen to what others are doing, because from learning from each other, we then build a strong solidarity arc across geographies and regions that helps us to ensure that everybody can reach justice where they are. The third point is about resources. I've talked about alignment of resources and need, but I also think that government officials who are on this call, institutions that are on this call, who have the resources, should ensure that these resources are made available. Because yes, informal justice system, customary justice system, they may not cost as much, but they require resources. To support frontline service providers, we heard about paralegals, for instance, in Kenya, resources to support their work, resources to ensure that we are documenting what is happening, resources to ensure that people who play a role in these frontline services are properly compensated for their services so that they can continue to do that work, and a realignment of budget principles to ensure that justice and frontline justice is actually budgeted for. And finally, is to measure and document evidence of what works, to show the value that some of these informal justice pathways are bringing to the table, not just for individuals who go before them, but for the society. The fact that we can use less money for more justice and more justice for less money is really, really important. And that is what the informal justice offers us. And I think these are critical messages that this campaign should carry, but also critical commitments that those who are listening to us here today, government officials, institutions, and other stakeholders should also carry. Justice costs money. We need to find that money, and we need to get our priorities right in making that possible. And I thank you so much again for the opportunity. And I commend the work we're doing here. And I hope this is just the beginning of more forums like this where we come to share experiences, but also re-energize ourselves with helpful examples of what is working, making sure that justice is within reach of everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Udo, and wonderful words as always. And thank you again for your support and your leadership with this campaign. Thank you to all the participants and all the panelists. Secretary Katamko, it is so late in the Philippines. Thank you so much for being with us until the end of this event. We really hope that today's launch marks the beginning of a deeper collaboration amongst us all and creating really stronger partnerships and concrete commitments towards advancing diverse pathways to justice globally. Thank you all. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All of you. Bye.